Good morning, everybody. This is day 4 of Make Your Own Sourdough Starter with me. And today we're going to be checking our sourdough, looking at it. Mine's got some nice bubbles. However, it's got some liquidy stuff again on the bottom. I think you can see that. And it smells pretty funky. It smells worse than yesterday. So we know that the microorganisms are still fighting their battle for dominance, and it's not quite acidic enough yet for the good bacteria to take over. So we will be feeding it this morning. However, I also noticed last night when I checked on it that although it was nice and bubbly for most of the day, it kind of flattened out a bit last night. So I think we're at the point where we can start feeding our sourdough starter twice a day now. So I'll be feeding it in the morning, and I'll also be feeding it before I go to bed at night. So it'll be about 12 hours apart. If your sourdough starter is lagging a little bit behind and it's not really showing signs of fermentation yet, you can still wait on feeding it twice a day. However, you don't really want to make anything at this point. When it smells, pretty bad like this, you don't want to make waffles or cupcakes or anything with it. We'll wait until it starts smelling better before we maybe make waffles or something. So I will pour out. I'm going to pour out all but about 30 grams. First off, I wanted to kind of show you what 30 grams looks like. So I'm going to pour out 30 grams. And it really doesn't have to be this scientific. It would be pour out most of your starter. Okay, this is what 30 grams looks like. Just enough on the bottom of the bowl, like a really large tablespoon or tablespoon and a half. So I'm going to pour out all but about that much on the bottom. Okay, so you can see what I've got there. And we'll go ahead and feed it. Take this out before I tear it. So here's my scale. I'm going to be putting in 50 grams of water. There we go. And we'll put in 50 grams of our flour mixture here, which is half all-purpose and half whole wheat, which I freshly ground the first day that we started feeding our starter. So let me tear that out. Just a little bit more. So check your starter today and see how it looks, and check and see how it smells. On day 4 is usually the breakover point, where by day 5 it might start smelling better. Well, it might not. It might take an additional day. But day 4 is really the breakover day, where it usually starts smelling better by day 5, and day 4 is when it's usually at its worst. So I'm going to stir it really good and get some oxygen in there. And this is what it looks like right after you feed it. It's kind of nice and thick still. This is what it looks like after it's been sitting for 24 hours. There's a big difference there. Okay, so what I'll be doing is putting the lid on and putting it back at room temperature, 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. and I'll be leaving it until this evening, around 9:30 to 10. I will feed it again, and so that'll be twice today, and then I'll go ahead and do a live stream again tomorrow. I'm not going to show you the feeding of it tonight. It's exactly the same as this. You'll pour out all but around 30 grams of the starter, and then you'll feed it 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water and stir it well, and then let it set overnight till tomorrow morning. But the other thing I wanted to talk about this morning was warm temperatures. I've had different people contact me over the years, and they live in countries where it's really warm. Or maybe you're going through summer and your house temperatures are hard to keep cooler, and so you have a real warm environment to deal with. So I have some suggestions for helping to keep your sourdough starter a little bit cooler. And this is during the initial 2 weeks when you're making your starter, because after the 2 weeks when it stabilizes, you can refrigerate it. So during the first 2 weeks when you're trying to keep it a little bit more at room temperature so that it can ferment and not take so long, because you can actually make a sourdough starter in the refrigerator. It will just take a lot longer. And since we don't want to take a lot longer than 2 weeks, we'll try to do something to cool them down if you're where it's really warm, but not necessarily keep it in the refrigerator. So some ideas that I have are the sourdough starter. I don't usually recommend you can use a tight-fitting cap. This is not tight-fitting, but my Cambro containers, they are tight-fitting, like this one. They're airtight. And the sourdough starters are anaerobic. They don't need air. They do like oxygen, but they don't need it to survive. But when you're in a hot climate, an enclosed container with fermentation is going to build some heat. So I would recommend a very finely woven cloth that can allow the heat to escape, and a rubber band so you can keep out the fruit flies. One thing you don't want is fruit flies in your starter. Now that happened to me once, and it made my starter smell horrible, and I had to throw it out. It got little larvae in it, and there's nothing more gross than finding worms in your starter. So I had to toss the whole starter out when that happened, and luckily I had a backup. So a tightly woven cloth like this would work great, especially if you got it wet first and then throughout the day sprayed it with water so that your sourdough starter inside didn't evaporate and create a heavy, thick crust on top. The evaporation would help keep it cool. And another way you could help keep it cool is to get a bowl, put water in it, set your starter in it, because the evaporation from the bowl of water would also help to keep your starter a little bit cooler. Some other suggestions I wrote down here, and that is you could use a little pinch of salt in your starter. Salt will help slow down fermentation so that in warmer temperatures it will ferment more quickly. So the salt would help slow down the fermentation. I've also got, you could use white flour completely instead of the whole grain flours, because all whole grains ferment more quickly than the white flours. So instead of using any whole grain flour, use only the white flour. You could start out with feeding with ice water. And ice water, of course, would warm up after a while, but it would at least help cool it down to feed with some ice water when you feed your starter. Another thing you can do is use a very low inoculation. Like for instance, I poured out all and kept 30 grams. Once your starter gets going a little bit better, like after day 5, you could probably pour out all except what's in the jar, maybe 10 grams, and then feed the starter a bit more, like maybe 60 to 70 grams of water and the same amount of flour. Because the lower the inoculation and the more food, the longer the sourdough starter can survive on the food. So And one other thing would be, if you really have a problem where it's always really warm, you might want to just think about making a really low hydration starter. Once your starter gets going, you might just want to turn it into a Levita Madre, or what would be similar to a Biga but not made with commercial yeast. And that is to have something that's 40 to 50% hydration that you keep all the time, because the wetter the starter, the faster the fermentation. So you might want to look into keeping a really low hydration type of dough that you pinch off, and then when you're ready to bake, and then go ahead and disperse it in water and continue with making your dough. So those are some of the things that I thought of that might really help you if you live in an area where the climate's really warm. So anyway, today's day 4. I hope that your sourdough starter is doing well. And by doing well, it probably is smelling pretty bad. So go ahead and feed your starter, and then feed it again tonight. And then we'll meet again tomorrow morning and see how our starters are doing. So we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.